without waiting more, let's welcome our next speaker on stage, Majid. Hey, Majid, how are you?
Hi, very good. How about you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm really enjoying this conference, so that's really good. Really nice to have you
Nice.
here today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So we're gonna talk about Flutter today, which I'm really not an expert in, so I'm really excited about this talk. How do you feel it?
Pretty exciting to be honest, because well, it's a React conference, and I'm talking about Flutter, and a lot of people maybe ask right now why I'm doing here. What the hell is talk about?
Yeah.
But we will figure it out very soon, and hopefully after 30 minutes or a couple of minutes that I'm talking, you will realize why I'm encouraging you to learn Flutter as well. And that doesn't mean you need to leave React and React Native behind. I'm still doing a lot of React in daily work, so we'll get to that.
Okay, great. That's awesome. I encourage you, dear attendees, to ask any question you do have in the Q&A tabs. And Majid, the stage is for you.
Thank you very much. Then let's get started. Again, thank you for having me in this conference. It's a pleasure to be in again once more virtually. Let's say in React JS Day. So I'm going to talk about Flutter today for React and React Native developers. And I will share also some personal experience, to be honest, because I've been a React and React Native developer for a long time. I mean, React but maybe since like I get into the front end development way back 6 7 years ago. Then I was doing some kind of like React application until today. Still, I'm using that every day. And with React Native, I've built applications and I really enjoyed it. But then we're going to talk about Flutter today and see why I'm encouraging you to also, as a React and React Native developer, learn Flutter or another framework which is building UI. Well, before starting doing that, so I'm going to actually show you a few things here. For example, these are all implemented like the previous one was a game, the famous game, right? And this one is also built in Flutter Web. And so you can see that right away. Or there is actually another example where you can see this animation. It might not be very fast in a streaming, but you can give it a try later and you can check it out yourself. These are a great example to show you that you can do almost everything with Flutter. So both in a native part as well as the web part. But we will get into that. And funny story is that these examples that I showed you right now, which you can also go and check it out later, they are all running on CodePen, or you can actually download the project and build a web HTML and then deploy it somewhere. In fact, the previous example were hosted in my my personal hosting. And well, today, what we're going to talk about is, first of all, I'm going to start with why. I mean, there is also a book called Always Start with a Why question, right? So I'm going to start with why. Then why I need to talk about this right now in this conference. And then I will have some comparison between Dart and JavaScript or TypeScript, and then React or React Native versus Flutter. So um, I was introduced before, but let me quickly introduce myself again. My name is Majid Hajian. I'm based in Oslo, Norway. I am a Google developer expert and a passionate software engineer, probably just like many of you right now in the call. And I organize like different meetups and conferences, and I write books and as well as tutorials, making videos, different places. So enough about me, but let's talk about Flutter. Let's start from why. And why I say that we need to learn Flutter as well. You see that I'm talking about front end or UI development right now. So I assume that many of us in this call are familiar with UI development. And I'm encouraging I'm encouraging you, and I'm saying that you need to learn Flutter. Then why? First of all, to me, when I was a React developer and I was doing like this front end and JavaScript work for a while, and then I came into the mobile development, firstly native part, and then I did the cross-platform ones. I realized that actually my train is kind of, I'm training my brain to understand different aspect of solving the problem or developing the UI for solving some problem on the screen. Different sizes, different, UX, and different patterns. It actually helps my brain to catch up the bugs or to catch up like the better user experience for my customer, regardless of which platform I'm actually developing. It gives me more depths to my knowledge regarding my UI development. Another thing is that, well, if I tell you that you are already 50% Flutter developer by knowing only Flutter and by knowing only React and React Native, you might become a little bit surprised. Why? Well, I'm 50% Flutter developer. Yeah, why not? I mean, you are. We will get into that. I'll show you how quickly you can get up and started with Flutter, right? The fact here is that so you can sharpen your skill by learning another, framework. You can learn another language. Well, a lot of people, including myself, I love JavaScript. I like TypeScript. I do use them in a lot of projects, Node.js, and etc. But learning other languages not only help me to sharpen and add another, skills to my skill sets and into my resume, but also it will widen my knowledge, right? That's what we call it in the architecture world, breadth of knowledge. So I've been working for the last maybe year as a solution architect, and the more I actually work, I am working into this role, I more realize that the stuff that you don't know and you need to know is very important to making some decisions and maybe even come up with some pattern for your application to have a better application. So just to increase this or extend this knowledge, it's very beneficial. And at the end of the day, well, if the effort of learning a new framework, specifically right now Flutter as a UI toolkit for React and React Native developers, let's say, it's quite low, then why not learning that? So you can add another skill to your, to your resume. You can open up a lot of new opportunities. Who knows what will happen next year to these frameworks, right? Or this year at all. So 3 years ago, Flutter was not even a thing, but today I'm talking to you, and based on some statistic, it's one of the most favorite, cross-platform application to build cross-platform UI application. It actually opens up a whole new world in front of you. You will be introduced to not only iOS and Android, already web, perfect, but you will also learn desktop application UIs development. Like you will learn Windows and Linux and Mac OS. That is great because it gives you even more depth to your UI development. So I hope that this reason is enough to learn Flutter. But I will onboard you today. You see that what I'm saying, I have a proof for that. So, but before that, let me quickly give you an overview why and how Flutter is working. So in fact, Flutter has this architecture, right? So you will always work with the framework, like where you would need to write Dart as a language for the framework. And in Flutter, there is always and only one language, and that is Dart. There is nothing else, right? So for native parts, maybe you have this engine that is taking care of building your application for other platforms. But then on the web part, you see that they will remove this engine and then replace it with JavaScript. And then you get what? You get web as well. But you're still dealing with the framework on top. So But let's get into the language. Why I'm saying Flutter and Dart is easy for TypeScript and JavaScript developers. We'll get to that very quickly. First of all, the similarities between two languages are quite a lot. If you have been doing TypeScript for a while, you're almost knowing like Dart more than 50%, I would say. Because you are already familiar with event loop. You know that, JavaScript is a single-threaded language. Dart is also similar. So most of the concepts that you know from the JavaScript and TypeScript, so you can actually apply it to Dart as well. You know some typing systems, like AOT or a head of compilation, which comes with TypeScript, that is coming to Dart as well. So most of these similarities, you can find them in Dart. So of course, well, each language will have its own implementation and syntax, right? That is the part that usually people say, yeah, I'm lost. I don't know. But I actually want to give you an example very quickly. And the example I'm giving you right now, it's an example that you will, if you come to Flutter or Dart world, so you will use it like every day. It's already 50% of what you need to know for developing a Dart application. Let me onboard you. For example, in TypeScript, you might have a concept of class, right? You define a class, very simple. So you have the similar thing in Dart. Then you will, in TypeScript, have a constructor where you can pass parameters, right? And then you have this colon with the type after the variable. So you have a local member like ID and say, hey, let's say that the type of this ID is number, or the parameter type is a string, right? But in Dart, what you do is a bit different. So in the class, you will define in TypeScript, you will have this method, right? Which is perfect. And then you will say, for example, you want to make an asynchronous. The asynchronous programming is a big chunk of programming paradigm in your daily work as a JavaScript developer. So you will have that almost similar in Dart too. So you define your method, you say with async keyword behind the method, and then you can like have a promise, right? That defines your asynchronous call, and you can use await to get that data, right? Let's imagine that you create a main function, and that main function is going to do like maybe an initialization of the class with new keyword. You get a new instance. You get access to this fetch info method, which was an asynchronous or an async function or method. And then you can await for the result. You can console log the result at the end. All right, that's perfect. And then how can you run this logic right now? You simply need to call main function. In fact, in JavaScript, if you don't do that, if you remove the main and then run it, you will still can run the program. But in Dart, you will need to have this main function. Okay, let's get into the Dart side. Let's compare it. First of all, in Dart, you will get these type before the variable is defined. So then, for example, if you compare ID as a number and ID in Dart, so you will get an integer number. So the type is integer in Dart. You will actually define it right before this variable. And then for the name, you can do the same thing. You have a string before the name. So the final keyword is similar to const or let here in this case. But actually, final is very similar to const. So, all right. So then you will have, when you define it this way, in JavaScript or TypeScript, you will get undefined because you didn't assign anything to these variables. But in Dart, you will get null as a value. These are the differences, right? And a constructor in TypeScript is a constructor named, but in Dart, the constructor name is a same name as class. That's fairly simple. So then you want to define a method, go ahead and do that. But you want to say this method is an async method. Then you say, hey, bring up this async after, sorry, bring up this async after this method. Then, while you have a concept of promise in TypeScript, you can actually have an equivalent name in Dart, which is feature. So you see the similarities are quite a lot. If you understand only this simple syntax, you have a very good time jumping into a Dart project because you understand now Darts. It's the same thing. You will have a main function, then a main function in each file in Dart will be executed automatically. You don't need to call that. And then you will get an instant. For instantiation a class, you don't need a new keyword in Dart. Well, that's simpler here. And then you will get access to fetch, you await, similar. Instead of console log, you will have print. That's pretty much it. And in fact, what I showed you here is literally 50% of my work every day. I'm using this syntax every day. So let's get into another paradigm, which you come into JavaScript, and you may have experience with that, and that is streams, or in JavaScript, we say observables, right? You can utilize it with reactjs, for example, in JavaScript. The concept of a stream is over there. You get the same thing in Dart, but that is going to be built into the language. You don't need any type of libraries for that. But let's get into the Flutter part. So now we know that actually Dart is not very scary. It's actually very simple to learn. So the only few syntax you will need to know, and then you're good to go. But how about the Flutter part? How can we compare that to React and React Native? How can I learn that? First of all, in Flutter, similar to React, everything almost is a widget, and you can think of a widget as a component. And you can create a widget tree or a component tree, and then you will have, a concept of element tree, similar to shadow tree and stuff like that, right? Very similar concept here. Everything is a widget, almost. And then that means similar to React, you have these components. That's perfect. So you know now one of the fundamental things from Flutter, which you already knew from React, to be honest. And just like React, you will have two types of component. You will call it in web DOM and a smart component, or you will say it like stateless or stateful components. Well, in Flutter, you will call them stateless widgets or stateful widgets, where the stateful widgets are going to hold some kind of state. You will access to set a state function, just similar to React. Let's actually get an example here, comparing React Native with Flutter. What you would do in Flutter is that you will have a class named, say, hello world, and you extend a stateless widget. But in React, you would do that with class-based approach. You would do that with a React.component, right? It's similar things. You would have a render function in React or React Native, where it's going to render some other components and elements, where in Flutter, you would get build method, where you will return that widget is going to generate or render something. It's very similar concept. You already knew this concept, to be honest. You just needed to have some comparison. So, in fact, you can reuse these widgets. You can actually import them. In React or React Native, you import them from some type of library, whether it's local or whether it's like an npm package. Well, in Dart, the syntax is fairly different. So you just import the main entry to the package or the file that is locally hosted on your root file of your application. That is going to automatically import all the classes. So in Dart, you don't need to explicitly export anything. Everything will be exported if you don't specify underline, which makes sense, which says that it's going to be private. That's it. There is no private public. That's very simple. You need to be explicit here. So let's have another example. Now I want to actually run an application. What would you do in React is very simple. Like you create like a, now I'm showing you another approach. It's a function based, right? I'm going to actually return my elements. That is perfect. In React Native, we have view, for example, which is taking care of the layouting. And then maybe some type of styling that you need to have. Perfect. You create your style. You pass your style to this view. Perfect. But in Flutter, instead of doing this way, which is more imperative, though you're going to have more kind of like declarative approach. You say, oh, I'm going to have a center widget. That's a component. And that's going to have a child. Oh, perfect. And then that child is actually a text, which is going to render hello world. And I need some type of, styling. Maybe I need a text direction. So you define everything declaratively. And now if I run this in Flutter, what I will see is this. That is a simple iOS and Android version of it. And then you see a hello world in the center of your application, similar to what you do in React and React Native. Let's get another example. Now, actually, I want to show to you how you can create this widget tree and import and export a little bit. So what you see here is that very simple again. So you have a class called my app. It's going to scaffold your application. Don't worry about these names because it should not scare you. These are just components. You would probably use similar names even in React application. You may create these yourself, or maybe you consume them from like an NPM package, right? It's very, very likely that you will get similar things. The only thing is that with Flutter, these are coming with framework because Flutter is a UI toolkit. It gives you a lot of UI elements out of the box. So then the comparison here is that, well, you can go ahead and like use these child. As you see in React Native, you can have a component and a child, and the component can have children, right? That's the similar case in in Flutter. So in Flutter, instead of these children or child, you will just declaratively mention that. You can say that is child and the child is another widget. What is the widget? That is, for example, text widget, right? It's a very close comparison here. And that is going to take care of your layouting like this one. Then you will get an app bar, you will get a text in the middle of the center. What I'm trying to say here is the widget in Flutter is defining three things. It can be a structural element that it's going to tell you, for example, if you need a column, a row, or stuff like that. Or it can be a stylistic, so you can say, oh, my widget, I need a background, or I need a text to be like bold, or etc. and etc. Or it might be some type of aspect of a layout. So let me give you another example, very close comparison here. We're going to create a custom card, right? And then what you do, that is more like a real example. So you will have in React Native, or maybe even in React, you will have like a render function, which is going to have a component. In this case, it's going to be view, taking care of the layouting. And then you have text. And then in the text, you will say, oh, I need a card with some props here, right? And then you're gonna look at the button, and you will have an onPress, event handler here. And then again, you will do something with that. And then you can reuse these custom card and passing the props later down to this component. That is exactly what you do in Flutter. It's just a slightly different syntax. You would have a custom card, a stateless widget, and then instead of props, you will get these parameters from constructor where you can pass. You can say index or function, in this case is onPress, that can be passed. And later, that comes as a parameter, name parameter to your class. That's simple if you compare it right now. And then you're going to have the build method, and then you say my layout, I want maybe a column to just have some widgets underneath, and so on and so forth. The rest are very similar. And then you will get this modular widgets. Like let's say you get this out of the box. Oh, that's good. So the structure of a Flutter application is also very similar to probably what you do, but it's a bit more opinionated. For example, when you create a Flutter project, you will have an Android, an iOS folder, and you will have a lib folder where everything where you are writing a Dart file will reside under that folder. And the main entry will be the main.dart file, which has only one main function, which is executing your app, running your app. And then you have test and the pubspec.yaml file. Here is the things. You will learn NPM. You already know NPM. That's your package management manager, right? Then in Dart, it's a bit different. You will get pub as a package manager. So the concept is similar, but instead of a JSON file, you will get like a package.json file. You will get a pubspec.yaml file. You will have a YAML file. You can define your metadata for the app, or you can have different packages over there as a dependency or dev dependency. So I doubt anyone, I think anyone in this call will know about YAML files. So even if you don't know, reading and writing YAML files is not very difficult, and usually editors is helping you. As an example, I'm going to show you how you want to load a static asset in a Flutter application. You need to define that in your pubspec YAML file, that you will have some sort of like an asset folder. Either you can be a specific, you can say each file, or you can use like global asterisk and say, hey, everything under assets folder. And then later, you will use an asset image widget, like an image widget in or image component in React Native. And you just need to pass the path of the your assets. Well, in this case, it's residing under assets / background. And in React Native, you will just use maybe require and say, hey, it's just relative to this path that I am, and that is going to be my icon. And like bundler will take care of moving around the things. So you will learn slightly different approaches here, which is actually good. Maybe you can come up with a better approach in your application, whether it's React Native or Flutter, to enhance your work development. Then you will have, for example, how can I, let me give you a couple of more examples here. Like you'll come to React or React Native, you have a component, and see the component will accept some props, like for example, data here. Well, in Flutter, you will actually pass them to an equivalent, let's say, implementation, and then you need to pass with different approaches. But if you look at these two examples, they are identical in both frameworks, and they will create this in both frameworks. So again, let me give you another example where usually when you want to have this layouting and defining your layouting with Flex, in React Native, you will use view, which is going to construct your layout, whether you can say it's column or, etc. That is a bit different in Flutter. Instead of having a view, just one thing, you will have a column, which is taking care of that direction already. And the column is going to have a children. You can specify what type of children this column can have. That's pretty much it. So if I now move on to the implementation, you see that this is going to be similar in both. The only thing is that the syntax is a bit different. Another example that I want to give you here is a styling. Particularly for web developer, writing CSS, well, it's part of our daily work, right? We write CSS, we define class and IDs and etc. Different approaches, maybe purely CSS, maybe CSS in JS and etc. Right? But at the end, we are writing CSS. Well, how you write your CSS and define your CSS in Flutter is a bit different. If you know now the difference in this comparison, I have an example for you, then it's fairly simple for you to jump into a Flutter project. So you need to know that you need to define your styling with Dart language, not CSS anymore. And that's good. But there is an equivalent. So for example, in each component, you will have like maybe a style where you would say, oh, my style font size, or in this case is 24 in CSS. I want 24, but you can use 24. And then maybe font weight, then you have font weight, font family, you have font family parameters. You can pass down all of your requirements to this, which is already also defined. An editor will help you to somehow show them in like an intelligence to you, and you can leverage that as well. You see that it's quite similar if you now see the comparison. Or another example is where you want to create in React Native. You might have like create a style sheet and then you pass that to your view or whatever style sheet that you have. Again, in Flutter, you almost do the same thing, but you do it with classes and parameters passing down to the classes. Fairly simple. Then you get such a things. And well, there are lots of other things. For example, events. How do you capture the events? Like on tap, cancel, click, or etc. Swap. And in Flutter, you will have a widget called gesture detector, where it will have all of these events as a parameters, where you can actually pass a callback and you can do whatever you want in this case. How about the state management? You were talked about like stateful widget. Flutter comes with a stateful widget out of the box, like a simple state management. In React, and you're gonna use set a state, for example, and you define your state. Either you use like hooks or maybe with React with the class-based, state management. So in Flutter, you will create an state which is going to define your variable. In this case, for example, look at the name. I defined it as Majid, and then you will define. You can change that with set state function, just as you do in Flutter and in React, and then you will go and change the value that you want to assign to that local variable. And what Flutter does is that after you set a state, every time you do a similar concept, it will render again. It builds the UI again. So in this case, I'm actually setting some states here, clicking, that's using gesture detector, clicking and changing the state, and so on and so forth. And another thing is that routing. So, well, I mean, routing is an important part of any application, web or any other application, right? So in fact, in React Native or in React, you need to hook up other packages to facilitate this routing implementation. But in Flutter, you will get that out of the box implemented to the root of app that you are going to use. In this case, material app. So you define your route like route A and B, and everywhere in your widgets, you will call a function called push named on the context, and then you will redirect user. That's fairly similar to what you probably do in React Native, but you use like navigation or etc. navigator function to handle that for you. But behind the scenes, it does the same thing. Flutter comes with a bunch of other things. For example, I'm not going to talk about like the features. That was not the purpose of this talk. The purpose of talk was to show you shoulder by shoulder, side by side comparison between React and React Native and Flutter to actually say, it's very simple to jump into a Flutter project as a React developer or React Native developer, because many of these concepts, how they are already being used, and you have that knowledge. You just needed somehow to compare to understand the code base and new code base. And in fact, I added a table here for you to see some of these, comparisons. So if you're coming from React Native part, for example, you're gonna have a button component where it's equivalent to elevated button or text button. Flutter and React Native comes with a lot of these type of, component and widgets. It's just some of them that I mapped for you to get onboarded easier. Some of them that you need like immediately. So with that said, I think I was a React developer and React Native developer, and then I came into Flutter and I learned a new language, new paradigm, a whole new features that it was not available in maybe TypeScript, and it gave me a much better understanding of like how I can organize my code in both, like kind of borrow the paradigms in both the frameworks and utilize the best in each of them based on the project. I'm not very strict on saying that you have to use this or you have to use that. That really depends. And as an architect, I also have to say, choosing between different solutions for different, problems, it really depends. There are some trades-off always. But as a developer, I think it's important we sharpen our skills. We add more and more and more skills to our resume and know more. And at some point you will get maybe a job or a task. You can go deeper and deeper to these technologies and become like master. If you're already master in React and React Native, then go ahead and learn Flutter and also become master in another technology. You can get access to all of the slides and sample codes under slides.com/myhandler, MHA Daily. And with that said, thank you very much. If you have any question, if you have done anything later and you are in trouble, you need some type of help, I'm happy to answer your questions later in my social media or wherever you can find me. With that said, thank you very much. Back to you.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Majid, for this awesome presentation. I guess we could go for a little Q&A session, if you don't mind. We've got a really great question from. I've got a really great question from Anton that is asking, how is the VS Code support for that on Flutter? Because VS Code is one of the most used IDE right now.
Absolutely. That's a very good question. I actually didn't talk about like the features of the framework and also how you can set up your environment and stuff. But what I can tell you very quickly is that I'm using VS Code like as a normal, like my daily editor. What you need to do for Flutter is only one thing. Flutter frameworks and Dart framework comes with all of the things that you need, like formatting, analyzer, documentation, whatever. It comes with SDK. You don't need to install anything extra. And it comes also with a plugin for VS Code. It's only one plugin. If you install Flutter, it also installs Dart plugin. Then you will get everything out of the box, like literally everything that you need for environment. You don't need to install anything else. Everything comes with those plugins.
Okay, awesome. And just another little one that is really interesting me. The comparison shoulder by shoulder between React Native and TypeScript stuff and that was and Flutter was really awesome. And what about the animation features in both of the frameworks? How it is in Flutter?
Yeah, actually, I had a slide about animation, but I removed it. Yeah, well, in Flutter, animation is part of the framework, and you will get some widgets to implement that. Some of them, they will facilitate and actually have like a very easy way to animate some stuff, very easy. While in React Native, you need to have a bit of setup, maybe install some, extra packages and things like that. But animation in Flutter is one of its strengths, to be honest, because you get 60 FPS out of the box for all type of animation. And that is mind-blowing. So, and implementing animation, I wish I had my slides in that I could show you, but shoulder by shoulder, it's way less in Flutter compared to web animations. Well, of course, in web or React Native, you can utilize CSS and type of things, but in Flutter, again, it's kind of declarative. You need to have a class of animation. You need to pass some parameters. You say from where to where you need to change the stuff and things like that. It's quite easy, to be honest. It's not that hard.
Okay, wow, that's just awesome. Thank you very much for being with us today. It was a real pleasure to have you on stage with us. So
Same.
enjoy the rest of the day and the conference, and I hope to see you probably next year in Verona, maybe.
Sure. See you then.
See you.
Bye.
Bye bye.